District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
Last night, you spent 2 hours deciding what to wear to the party. This morning, it'll take you 2 minutes to list it on Depop and make your money back. Just grab your phone, snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. The sheer dress and platform heels you'll never wear again? There's a birthday girl searching for them right now. Your one-and-done look is about to pay for your next night out. Or at least the ride home. Your style can make you cash. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. We're keeping things closer to the mid-Atlantic in this week's episode. It's all about lead ammunition bans in Maryland, our neighbors across the river. I brought on two great experts, Mark Oliva from the National Shooting Sports Foundation and B. Frederick from Safari Club International, to talk about a slew of legislation, namely the so-called Comprehensive Community Safety Funding Act, which would enact a 11% excise tax on guns and ammunition sales, and also another bill that has kind of slipped under the radar, Maryland Senate Bill 181, to require the Department of Natural Resources to prohibit donation of certain processed venisons to entities unless the deer was harvested using non-lead ammunition. That crossed over on April 9th. So you will hear discussion about these two bills in particular throughout this episode for point of clarification, if it's not clear. But grateful to B and Mark for joining the podcast this week. I hope it's informative. This is a case study to follow because your state could be next. We are following closely the sin taxes that are being proposed to put 11% excise taxes on guns and ammunition. We also follow and are worried and concerned about lead ammunition and tackle bans. It's a opening of the door to further prohibitions of hunting and fishing in our view. And I brought on two great experts. Listeners are familiar with Mark Oliva from NSSF, and I'm very delighted to welcome B. Frederick from Safari Club International to talk about what is happening. So gentlemen, why don't you break down what is happening with Maryland or sin taxes, whoever wants to start first, just to get my listeners up to speed with these new updates.
Yeah, Gabriella, thanks for having us on. So when it comes to the sin tax that Maryland wants to propose, is very much in line with what you saw already pass out in California and even in Colorado. And you have several other states that are considering this. And again, they want to put a 10 and 11% tax on the sale of ammunition and of firearms, both handguns and long guns. And of course, they pick those numbers very purposefully because those mirror the numbers that are that manufacturers already pay for the Pittman-Robertson excise tax, which supports all your wildlife conservation in America. The difference here is what Maryland is proposing to do is they want to put a tax on the sale of it. So they want you as the gun owner, you as the ammunition buyer, to pay that tax, which is tantamount to a sin tax or a poll tax to be able to purchase ammunition or firearms, which is in essence exercising a right. You can't exercise your Second Amendment rights if you can't freely approach that gun counter and purchase a firearm and purchase ammunition. A lot of people will say, well, what's the difference? You've already got an excise tax paid by the manufacturers. Why couldn't we do the same for the sale of it? And the difference really is the manufacturers pay that excise tax on every firearm or every box of ammunition they produce. We all know that cost is passed along to us as a consumer, but that tax is paid by the manufacturer for the cost of that product at the first point of sale, whether that's going to a distributor or that's going directly to a retailer who may have been ordering it directly from the manufacturer. So that tax isn't directly on you. But when you're talking about putting an excise tax on the sale right there at the gun counter, that's like telling you you've got to pay an excise tax when you want to read a newspaper to exercise your First Amendment rights, or you want to pay an excise tax when you want to go vote, because that is your right to vote. And of course, we all know that poll taxes at the ballot box are ruled unconstitutional. So we have a serious concern about this, that they're trying to raise additional artificial barriers to people trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. The other problem that we have along with this is they said that they're going to use this money that they're going to raise off this excise tax for gun control efforts in the state to be run through their Office of Gun Violence Prevention up in Annapolis. So what the state of Maryland is talking about doing, what the legislators there are talking about doing, is putting an excise tax on the people who obey the law, who follow the law, to pay for the sins and the crimes and the harm that is caused by criminals who misuse and don't follow the law, misuse firearms and don't follow the law. So you, as a law-abiding citizen, law-abiding gun owner in Maryland, would be paying for the criminal misuse of a firearm by someone who has no respect for life or law. And that kind of runs counter to who we are as a society. You're holding the wrong person accountable. And of course, we've seen that the anti-gun factions in Annapolis pay no attention to that reasoning because they just, in essence, look at everything firearm related as something that is evil and sinful, and they want to be able to get it out of there. So they're going to tax it out the way they can. And that's why I think you're right, calling it a sin tax.
B, from your vantage point, why is it concerning for you and SCI?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on the same page as Mark and NSSF. I think that he's done a good job kind of laying it out. And I think he hit on some good points. You see these states, whether it's California or Colorado or maybe New York, or I know we've seen it in Massachusetts as well. So these states, you could kind of name them on, maybe two hands of kind of the states that you think would probably be proposing these types of regulations or laws or legislation. And we can see it there. We see it with other issues as well. And we're going to talk about lead later, but lead or a whole host of other issues where you have these legislatures that are really vehemently opposed to our way of life and the sportsman's way of life and hunting and shooting and firearms and things like that. So trying to do everything they can to subvert that through a number of different things. Obviously, in this case specifically talking about the sin tax here and the extra excise tax, and so it's just kind of interesting to see the roadmap, and you'll see it in one state, and then you can kind of chart the path of where you're going to see that in other states as well. Maryland is kind of a case study for that. Again, California, Colorado stick out, and there's some others in New England as well. But certainly very opposed to these type measures where we see them pop up across the country.
And what is the status of the Comprehensive Community Safety Funding Act as we're talking right now? I know pre-recording, we were talking about that it could be passed anytime, signed into law by Governor Wes Moore, but what's the status currently as we're talking?
B, I'll let you go ahead and take a stab at that.
As we've seen the last few weeks, so they had crossover a few weeks ago. I believe it was the 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. They had crossover a few weeks ago. So just where these bills had to come out of the chamber of origin, whatever side it was, and so we saw some movement there. So that's kind of the initial hurdle. Obviously, they have to come out of the committee prior to that. So saw some of that movement there, and then whether it's politics or horse trading or all of the above, seeing some additional movement or at least discussion about these bills, and then we'll see. This week I worked a lot with Mark's colleague Chris Kopacki and other sportsmen's groups as well on a number of our priorities. In this case, in Maryland here, as you kind of near the finish line here this week.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note, Gabriella, as B was talking about. These things move very quickly through the states. The states aren't, the exception of a couple, the states aren't in session year-round. So they'll be in for 60 or 90 days, and they're going to move very quickly on some of this legislation. It's going to move through one chamber, it's going to get through the committee process, and then it's going to hit that crossover mark. And that's kind of where we're at with Maryland. So we're looking at about a week left in the session or so. And there are a couple bills like this that are still in committee that that the legislators are still looking at, but these things can move very quickly. That you could have a vote on it, and it could very quickly be out of committee and then into the full chamber for a concurring vote, and then up to the governor's desk in a matter of just 2 or 3 days. So, for your listeners who are really invested in these issues, their opportunity to make their voices heard is fairly limited.
It is the case in Maryland, and I've noticed in both Maryland and Virginia, they try to limit comments and public opinion to swiftly get this passed kind of under the rug. But there's an interesting figure who is behind this effort, particularly in Maryland. Who would like to go first and explain who kind of this shadowy figure is? He was previously with Humane Society, and he's now starting and creating umbrella groups to push this as among his other pet issues. So who wants to take a stab at Wayne Pacelli, I believe is his name.
Yeah, Mr. Pacelli has long been a thorn of the side of the hunter because he's been out there raising money supposedly to try and, work for the welfare of animals and wildlife. But really what we've seen is that he's used these groups that he's formed as ATM machines for his own personal account. There are a lot of other issues about that follow Wayne Pacelli, to include his kind of disgraceful exit from the Humane Society of the United States, where he faced charges or faced accusations of sexual harassment. There are certainly questions about his character. But when we look at the professional use of these organizations, he's been really using these to line money. So they put out these commercials like, hey, you've got to take care of these puppies and kittens in the shelters. But the money that people are sending to them isn't supporting your local shelter. And that people are concerned about taking care of their cats and dogs at their local shelter and wanting to make sure that, they're going to get adopted instead of being euthanized. They're better off going to that local shelter directly and supporting that. Mr. Pacelli has made a career of setting up these companies that are lining his own pockets, and he's living a pretty comfortable lifestyle doing this. But, after his exit from the Humane Society of the United States, he started up this animal wellness action, and that's really the group that's kind of being pushing right now what the other issue we're seeing in Maryland and the several other states, and that is the effort to ban the use of traditional lead ammunition for hunting. Now, Mr. Pacelli has told Maryland's legislature that he doesn't oppose hunting. That it's just the traditional lead ammunition that he has a problem with, because he sees this as a health issue, not just for wildlife. He sees this as a health issue for people. And I want to take that apart in a couple different strokes here. One, Mr. Pacelli has never met an anti-hunting proposition that he didn't support. He is vehemently against hunting, especially hunting used as a wildlife conservation tool, which it is. That we have to have healthy, managed wildlife populations, and your today's outdoorsman and outdoorswoman is a critical tool into making sure that we have that balanced wildlife population that we can live alongside with. But two is, he talks about this lead ammunition being an issue. Listen, the National Shooting Sports Foundation supports the voluntary use of non-traditional, formularies for hunting. If you want to use, tungsten or bismuth or steel or anything else that's any of these other formulas that are coming out, and you want to use copper, great, good on you. And there's some really good bullets that are out there on the market today, and the performance of these bullets is exceptional. But we know that if you take all the other formularies from steel shot that many people will buy for waterfowl hunting, to the tungsten and bismuth, and to copper ammunition, that still only makes up about 1% of all the ammunition that's available in the United States. So when you start pushing people out of that market and you say you can't use that, we start asking questions why. And the reason we believe that groups like Mr. Pacelli's Animal Wellness Action is pushing that is because they want to price your average hunter out of the market, because it is much more expensive to buy that ammunition. But two is on this, pushing this is there's no sound science to show that this is harmful to wildlife populations. We manage wildlife at the population level. So they always point to a sick eagle saying, hey, this ingested leg fragments from an animal that was shot with lead ammunition and left in the field, and this is going to be an issue for wildlife populations. But the eagles in the United States are off the endangered species list. They're off the threatened species list. They're flourishing across the country, from coast to coast, from north to south. The eagles are doing very, very well. If you are concerned about leaving, lead ammunition inside a gut pile in the woods, there are ways to take care of that. You can bury that gut pile so it's not openly available to raptors for them to eat. But when he talks about issues that it's going to be harmful to people, well, they've been hunting wildlife in North America here for about 500 years or so with lead ammunition, and there has never been one documented case of anybody suffering through lead poisoning from food that was ingested while hunting with traditional lead ammunition. In 2008, the CDC studied this issue in North Dakota. They found that the people who were eating wildlife, game harvested through hunting, that their blood lead levels were actually lower than the ambient population. Mm-hmm. So this isn't an issue that people want to talk about. And they show these pictures that can be a little upsetting to look at, and they say these bullet fragments everywhere. Well, there's also, bullets that are made for hunting. The hunting ammunition that I use is designed to be able to hold its rigidity. It's able to hold its form as it travels through an animal when I'm harvesting that animal. So there isn't nearly this loss that you might see for a bullet that is used for range application, which isn't bonded to the jacket. So this really is a lot of misnomer, a lot of sleight of hand, and a lot of false accusations without any sound science. And they haven't produced any sound science to back up their claims. And this is exactly what we saw happening through the previous administration when the Interior Department was pushing lead bans through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and of course those were all rolled back and pushed back under this administration. So I think people need to understand what's happening. Is you have very well funded special interest groups who say they don't have a problem with hunting when in fact they do. That's the core of who they are. They want to ban hunting, and they're going to start with it by taking away your ability to use ammunition that's affordable for you to get out there in the field with your kids.
On the lead issue specifically, we've been very involved there. We're very involved on the federal level as well, and I know NSSF and other groups are. So whether it's federal, attempts to ban the use of hunting lead ammunition, we've seen some of our champions there in Congress, Congressman Rob Whitman from Virginia and Senator Steve Daines from Montana, and the Protecting Hunters and Anglers Access Act. So we see that where if that law were to become law, or the legislation were to become law, would not allow these federal agencies to restrict the use of lead ammo on these large swaths of public land. So there's that. And then, here is, again, this is just an annual attempt in Maryland to restrict the use of hunters and hunting with lead ammo. And, Mark hit really all the salient points. But, every time we're up there, we're, again, Mark's colleague, Dr. Chris Kopacki and myself, and Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, NRA, other groups are up there, and we're just having the facts on our side and saying, hey, lead's used commercially in several forms. The form in ammunition is not the same, and as the form in lead paint or or gasoline, and essentially they're just conflating what they're saying about lead is technically not wrong, but it's a totally different type of lead. So they're trying to get this emotional response from legislators, and we're up there saying, hey, we're not talking about lead paint, we're not talking about lead gas, and we're talking about metallic lead, elemental lead, and that's not the same. It's not easily absorbed by the body. And then, quick to point out, hey, there's a lot of different groups that actually don't support mandated blanket bans of lead ammunition. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation, they had a lead study working group a couple of years ago. It's getting a little more data. It's from 2022, but it's really good. They had a lot of good groups involved, including some of the birding groups, some of the hunting groups, some of the environmental groups, and they did not recommend a blanket ban on lead ammunition. Obviously, the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't right now. This current administration, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, they don't recommend a blanket ban. The Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, they don't recommend it. Arizona Game and Fish Department, they don't recommend a blanket ban. They're all recommending what Mark said earlier, voluntary, educational, incentive-based programs that allow the hunter to decide what makes the most sense for them, depending on, what species they're hunting, where they are, just personal choice. So we think, again, if there's documented impacts, in a specific area, where they're actually occurring. So show us where it's actually occurring, and then let's have discussions on what we can do to make changes in that area for that species during that time of year, whatever that looks like. But the things that they're saying there are just, really just incorrect when we're talking about the impact of lead ammunition in the use of hunting and the impacts, quote unquote, impacts it may have, environmentally or with human health.
Yeah, I think, Gabby, B brings up a really good point. Is they've been pushing this issue up and down the coast here, especially on the eastern seaboard. But we just saw within the past couple of weeks that this very same initiative that we're seeing being pushed through Maryland through the legislature was proposed to New Jersey's Department of Wildlife as well, and that proposal to kind of misuse the pun a little bit, if I can, went over like a lead balloon. The wildlife biologists took a look at it, and they absolutely did not support it. They said that they think that the voluntary education efforts are the best suited efforts to make sure that hunters can choose the ammunition that's going to be most effective for them, that they didn't see that the need to put this before a petition and a ballot, going toward a ballot initiative was going to be an effective way of wildlife management in their state. So, New Jersey rejected this idea, and we really, we're hoping that we can, get the ear of the lawmakers there in Maryland to kind of see through some of this, smokescreen that's been put up by Mr. Pacelli's group and those who are trying to, essentially ban hunting altogether. When they say that, hey, we support hunting, we just don't support it with lead ammunition. That's all false. We just know it is. And we were able to see that, the regulators of hunting in New Jersey saw through that, and we're hoping that the Maryland lawmakers will see the same.
That would be encouraging, because I think my listeners are aware that in states and countries and continents where this was tried, you do see evidence of people pulling back from these activities. I think of my home state when they enacted these phase outs. I think we saw fewer people fishing and hunting as a result. And I remember from over a decade ago in the European Union, they commissioned a study and they asked respondents, how many of you would continue hunting or fishing if there were lead phase outs? And 25% said we would stop these activities altogether. So there is concrete evidence that if these prohibitions were put in place, you would see displacement from the sport and then dropping off from the activity altogether. So the evidence is out there anecdotally and through concrete evidence. So I think listeners are aware, and thank you both for stating that. But what else can we and my listeners surmise from what's happening in Maryland that you both have not discussed yet?
Well, real quick before we jump to that, sure. Gabby, I just want to, just to your point, again, just kind of the negative impacts of the ban were it to happen. So kind of to your point, what you're saying right now, not only do we think these proposals are unnecessary and burdensome, but we think they're going to have real negative impacts. So they're going to have impact, just like you said, on hunter participation. And so if that's true, based off what Mark said earlier, we're all familiar with, the North American wildlife, concept of funding and conservation there with license fees, and then obviously the excise tax talked about earlier. But if folks do quit hunting, that's going to have an negative impact on hunter participation. That's going to have a negative impact on DNR funding. And then, in Maryland, as a specific example, we would argue it's going to have an impact on whitetail deer management. We think, folks are going to quit hunting, whether it's, farmers. They did amend it briefly to add an extra year for farmers in their deer management assistant program in the Senate committee. So, I guess some of the farmers kind of made their voices heard. And again, that's just 1 year. I think we failed to say it's a 2-year phase out, the current proposal. So they would, if it were to pass this year, then by 2029, all hunting, all species, all calibers, which we hadn't even talked about, the 22 long rifle, where there's not an actual non-lead alternative that works. So again, these blanket bans don't work at all. They're not necessary. They're burdensome, and they're going to have real life consequences on hunter participation and conservation funding and wildlife management.
Yeah, and to kind of put an exclamation point on what B is explaining, just this past year, Maryland got nearly $7.9 million from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's WISFR program. That's the program that's funding wildlife projects in the state. And of course, we've been able to, and Gabriella, you've been a beneficiary of being able to go out there and see what's happening when they're using these funds to manage the black bear population.
Yeah, the bear den study last year that we did. That was such an honor. Yeah.
All those things are funded through the monies that are coming from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that comes from the Pittman-Robertson dollars. Now, if you have people who stop going out hunting, that money is contingent upon the number of licenses that are sold in the state. So just like B was saying, you have a drop in hunters because they say, all right, it's getting too expensive to get out there anymore. I'm just not going to do it. It's become a pain in my butt. Then you're going to start losing on that money. And that really starts to hurt the programs that are benefiting wildlife the most. Mm-hmm. Everything that you saw on that bear den study was paid for by Pittman-Robertson excise tax dollars, from the formularies for the sedatives to the study software to even the funding programs for some of these biologists to get their master's degrees to know what's happening and figure out how to manage the populations. Those are all contingent upon those funds coming through. So again, just this past year alone, nearly $7.9 million to the state of Maryland, and that could be at stake. That could have a serious, a hatchet job come to that budget if you see hunters dropping off because of very short-sighted proposals like this.
Right. Yes. And we always talk about how there's a perennial threat to funding. I think federally we'll see it staved off for the most part. I think with both of you and plenty of others that we know in our circles that are making sure that the funding is perpetual and continues. We don't have to worry, at least federally, for the next few years. But if you have a different landscape in the future, that could certainly be jeopardized as we see these kind of rewilding efforts take over the individual states. Could it happen nationally? That's something we all fear. Equally, with transpiring in the next few years with the Wildlife for All groups, I bet you they're tied to Wayne Pacelle in some form or fashion. That group is a big concern to me, and how they're trying to take over and remake the wildlife agencies to move it away from hook and bullet activities. But what else about this situation would you guys like to hone in on while I still have you?
I'll just say real quick, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Mark. I mean, the Sunday hunting effort's always been a big one for sportsmen and women, and in Maryland, it's kind of been a patchwork quilt of laws and regs, whether it's county ordinances or species or times or things like that. And, so to some legislators and sportsmen and DNR's credit, they had a big effort over the last year to try and have a pretty comprehensive bill. And they're, kind of tired of dealing with the one off, two off kind of stuff every year. And there's even a few proposals this year that are still county by county, but big effort there to get Sunday hunting a little more, straightforward. It was a rather lengthy, complicated bill, which may have hurt it in the long run in the process. And it's also still alive. They did unfortunately amended out the waterfowl provision, which I know a lot of our sportsmen's organizations, partners, us included, are not happy about. But so there is a proposal on the table right now that's still alive that would allow for that would kind of expand the Sunday hunting opportunities in Maryland. It would also give the DNR some of that direct regulatory authority after a few years as well. So really big concerted community-wide effort. Again, can't reiterate enough, especially in these states that have rather truncated sessions. You're going to have a lot of politics, for lack of a better word, and just kind of the natural back and forth of deal making and that kind of stuff. So yet to be seen kind of where that lands. But that's a big issue I know for a lot of our groups. It's just that access and opportunity piece associated with Sunday hunting.
Yeah, and I have to back up everything B said there. I mean, we're always concerned about the Sunday hunting issues. There's only a handful of states that still have these old blue laws, and we believe they're antiquated and they need to be updated. If you're able to go tailgating and watch a football game on a Sunday, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get out to the great outdoors and be able to enjoy that with the ones you love as well. So, I think that these are all ripe for updating and bringing up to speed. We couldn't be more thankful for groups like Safari Club International and the others who are in this fight daily with us to kind of push this forward and make some traction here. And to kind of go along with that, it's the last last pitch at the end of that you want to give on some of these things is that, man, the best way we can fight these things is to be able to grow more hunters and anglers, right? To get people more out there and enjoying the outdoors. And NSSF has their +1 program, and that's where we try to get every hunter, every recreational shooter to make that pledge to grow one more person just like you every year. And if every hunter, every recreational shooter makes that pledge that they're going to take one more person out to the field with them, they're going to put one more person in that duck blind or take somebody to sit with them in a deer blind and be able to share that joy and mentor somebody into the sport of hunting, to be able to enjoy that pastime and know what it is to be an active participant in wildlife conservation and understand what it means to put healthy food on your table. Then we would be in really good shape. And that's really what we need. We need to grow more hunters. So we need to get more people out there into the woods. And we need to make sure that, more people are invested in this. And we can make sure that the generation that's coming up behind us is going to be able to enjoy the wildlife that we've been able to grow up with and enjoy with our families.
That is extremely important. And I hope to teach my niece and nephews that as they start to get older. Because it really is important to perpetuate the sport. And we always keep hearing these alarm bells that we're not having enough of participants in both, not so much shooting sports, but hunting is kind of dwindling. Fishing is okay, but it is important to make sure that we continue to increase participation and perhaps exceed goals and targets that have been outlined so we can have that there. links for listeners to be aware of the Maryland issue, to follow your respective organizations. We'll include them in the show notes. Where would you like everyone to go to weigh in on this?
Yeah, for NSSF, they can go to www.nssf.org. We have a government relations page there where we're tracking everything both at the federal level and the state level. And you can find that. For more information on the +1 that I talked about, that's it. Just go into Google, type +1. You're going to find that page. And you'll be able to find all the resources you're going to need to be able to get somebody out there, whether it's to find a range or find somewhere that they can go on public land to go hunting. All that stuff's available to you.
Yeah, on our end, it's just easy as well. It's safariclub.org, so we'll have everything there. We also kind of have our advocacy and issues landing page. They'll have a lot of information on Maryland, even some of the other states we talked about as well, and then lead issues, Sunday hunting, a number of other things. We also will have our grassroots tool, like a lot of groups do, but ours is we call it the HAC, but it's the Hunter Action Advocacy Center. So just kind of grassroots way for folks to sign up. In this case, Maryland residents. Just trying to keep it local for the state folks there. But Maryland residents can sign up for this issue, and then other listeners in other states and other issues, we'd love to have you sign up. And just kind of a tool that we use, whether it's there federally in Congress or within the states, to make your voice heard with elected officials and oppose certain things or support certain things as well. And so, for us, our members and our advocates are kind of the backbone of SCI, and we want to have them engaged as well, whether it's through the chapter network or just directly through SCI in general. Having those boots on the ground is invaluable, and having those connections there at the State House and just with elected officials and decision makers is invaluable when we're trying to promote or oppose various issues.
Well said. Agreed. Thank you both really for taking time out of your very busy schedules. I know there's been a lot happening with conferences and other policy related things. So thank you both for coming on the show, and we will get this out there. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, Gabriella. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.